Does red light therapy work? And if so, what are the best devices? Because there are a number of them on the market, from cognitive enhancement to hair health, improving the appearance of skin. There's also devices for the thyroid, which may improve thyroid autoimmunity. Some research has shown the ability to improve chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and even sleep. So this follows then, what are the best devices? Is stronger better? Is more expensive superior? Do you need a medical grade device? We will answer these questions today and provide you with a few of the best devices for these top applications. And by the way, we'll include links to these products. And I have no affiliation to any of these companies, but I have done a lot of experimentation. And so I want to share with you what's worked for me and where we have sort of the best device for the target use. And if you're new here, welcome. I am Michael Ruscio, a doctor in clinical practice, an adjunct professor, and I also work as a clinical researcher with a few papers published in scientific journals and more in the works. And firstly, let's just linger for a moment on the question of, does red light therapy work? Now, we have dedicated an entire video deep diving into this question for the various use cases, whether it be reduction of thinning hair, anti-aging of the skin, recovery of joint and muscles, reduction of pain, let's say for fibromyalgia, improvements in energy levels for chronic fatigue, or even enhancing cognition, just to name a few. And the general answer is yes. There are clinical trials of various levels of quality, admittedly, but the general and overwhelming trend is that red light therapy does work. Now, it's not a panacea, but when we look at a sham or a fake device compared to an actual treatment device in some of these clinical trials, we do see benefits. So I just want to start there, that categorically we can say that red light does work. Again, another video goes into the details if you want those. Today, let's focus on the devices. How quickly does it work? This is one of the things I just want to briefly speak to. Roughly 1 month. And part of the reason for this is because the red light will help the mitochondria, which produce energy for cells, better produce energy. And it's actually little specks of copper inside of the mitochondria that absorb the light from the red light, and that is used to increase the mitochondria membrane potential, therefore allowing the mitochondria to produce more energy. Therefore, things like skin can do more of its function, producing one product or compound, collagen, and therefore leading to the anti-aging effects. Because that process takes some time, this is why roughly a month to see benefit is a good benchmark. And we'll come back to that mitochondrial membrane potential in a second, because that's actually one of the key points regarding how to select the right devices, meaning it is possible to overtreat and to undertreat. So understanding what the target treatment, which is usually measured in joules per centimeter squared in terms of the total amount of energy delivered to a tissue, is very important in selecting the best devices. And if this information is helpful, please like, comment, or subscribe. This really does help the channel reach more people, so it is deeply appreciated. And that's sort of a nice transition to the criteria that we have used to select these devices. There are 3. The wavelength, so this is how deeply or superficially the red light will penetrate. Said simply, the longer the wavelength, the deeper the penetration. The shorter the wavelength, the more superficial. Now, short or long is not good or bad. It just depends on what is the use case. If our goal is more of a superficial application, then we want to favor a shorter wavelength. And if it's a deeper application, then a longer wavelength. And maybe you want all purpose. So then you'd want a blend of various wavelengths. So criteria 1 is the wavelength, and you'd actually be surprised. Some companies don't tell you what the wavelength of their devices are. This hints at our second criteria that underpins the device recommendations, which is quality. Now, quality may sound like kind of a vague term, But we're defining quality as, do you have transparency regarding your specs? Because if we can't verify what the irradiance, the output, that's the joules per centimeter squared is, what the wavelengths are, then there's no way that we can determine and calculate if this device is hitting the target output that we're looking to achieve. The third point, and maybe the most interesting as it pertains to the therapeutic target, is the dose. Again, the dose measured as joules or energy per centimeter squared per unit of area. Here's a very, very important concept regarding the dose and hitting the target dose. There's something known as a biphasic response, meaning if we have a very low dose of light, it has a minimal effect on optimizing mitochondrial function. However, if we go to the other end of the spectrum and we have too high of a dose of light, this can actually reduce mitochondrial function and simultaneously increase levels of reactive oxygen species, sort of akin to inflammation. I just want to read this quote because it makes this point. A biphasic dose response, meaning there's too much, there's too little, and there's sort of the Goldilocks. A biphasic dose response has been frequently observed where low levels of light have a much better effect on stimulating and repairing tissue than higher levels of light. And again, this helps just to set the groundwork for the devices that we're recommending, because as the consumer, you're sort of prey to different companies trying to one-up one another by saying that we have the strongest, we have the best, and that's not the case. And again, this study is a good, if nothing else, point to bridle those who are using red light from not overusing. Now, this diagram may look a little bit involved, but what you're seeing here are three things. They're tracking reactive oxygen species. So this is part of mitochondrial metabolism will produce these sort of, oxygen-free radicals. And some of that is good because it is almost like exercise, where you have a little bit of damage to the muscle from exercise, and then the muscle responds, recovers, and becomes stronger. So reactive oxygen species, which red light will stimulate, you have that mitochondrial membrane potential. That sort of tells you how much potential energy can then flood through the turbine of the mitochondria to then produce ATP. And that's the third line on this graph here. Now, what you're seeing is with progressively higher doses of red light, you're seeing all three of these track together. So more reactive oxygen species, more or higher mitochondrial membrane potential, and then the thing we're really after is more ATP or energy. They all increase until you hit this critical juncture. And then what happens? You start seeing everything decline. So reactive oxygen species, mitochondrial membrane potential, and ATP all decrease. And then they continue to sort of crash, and reactive oxygen species then spikes. So if you go too far, you plummet your mitochondrial membrane potential, your ATP production, while simultaneously your reactive oxygen species go way up. And this actually happened to me. I was, on a kick of red light, and all of a sudden I started having bilateral patellar tendonitis. Both my knees were sore. And I finally pieced together that my daily total body bed application of red light was too much. And as soon as I started using the red light, exactly as we're going to outline with the dosing recommendations here in a second, 3 days per week rather than 7, those issues of joint inflammation in my knees went away. So that's exactly what you're seeing here. And again, this is a key point, because even if you follow the recommendations of the devices that we're going to cover in a second, but you use them too much, you might see inflammation in joints, or even accelerated aging, or exacerbation of, rather than improvement of, fatigue. And there is a data point here that took this a level further and applied red light via different doses to a group of runners. They dosed either 15, 30, or 60 joules, and I'll just quote the findings. The 30 joule dose promoted the highest ergogenic or performance-enhancing effects in runners, which suggests a typical biphasic dose response. Again, biphasic means there's that sweet spot. So again, all this to help equip you with the knowledge that there is such a thing with red light as overtreatment. And with how in vogue red light is becoming, I am growing a little bit concerned that it's going to become somewhat commonplace for people to be overdosing themselves, especially, let's say, if you have a panel, so you're trying to do, let's say, total body, plus you're using a face mask to try to have an anti-aging effect on your skin, you might actually end up hitting that spike of reactive oxygen species because you're overloading the red light. Okay, so let's discuss devices. One of the applications is total body, and the total body can be done with panels. I think panels are the most practical. There's a number of companies that offer panel devices out there. My view, our view, is the best is the Platinum LED Biomax series. One of the things I like about the Platinum LED Biomax series is they are modular, meaning they are panel sizes that run from, maybe 1.5 feet to about 4 feet. And what you can do is you can buy one and then buy two, and you can buy up to four and end up with this sort of maybe 6 foot by 3 or 4 foot total body bed application. And what's nice about the total body, obviously, is that you can achieve multiple uses at once: skin wrinkles, pain reduction, muscle recovery, thyroid autoimmunity, fatigue, sleep, fibromyalgia, to name a few, may all be able to be improved via the use of a panel device. Now, a couple caveats. With panels, it is helpful to have a range of wavelengths because, as we discussed earlier, if you're trying to use a panel for an all-purpose protocol, which would make sense, you want to get the most therapeutic effect from a treatment session, and you don't want to be using multiple devices because then you run the risk of overtreatment. This is where I find the range of wavelengths from the Platinum LED, which ranges from short, 480, to long, 1060, helps give you multiple depths of penetration. Plus, they're transparent about their specs. And from that, we can calculate that the target dosage is anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes per treatment session, done 3 times per week at a distance of about 12 inches away from your body. All of these parameters matter. If you're too close, that increases the treatment intensity and also changes the depth of penetration. And if you're, like I was, using it too frequently, you can also overdose yourself. So bear that in mind. Now, there are other lights on the market. There is a device called the Mito Red Light. And this is also, I think, a decent light, although it has shorter ranges of wavelengths. That's one where you can't just go by how pretty the website is or how attractive their marketing language is. You have to look at the specs. A less expensive option if someone's trying to get into the door for a total body application is a red light sort of sleeping bag, if you will, or a pod called the Hooga red light. This is about $1,400, whereas to do the full body setup at home, it's going to cost you, depending on how many panels you do, a couple thousand to maybe $5,000 to $7,000 to do the Platinum LED as a total body setup. The Hooga red light is, again, $1,400. It's not quite as strong and it doesn't have the range of wavelengths, but if budget is a concern, then that might be a viable, more budget-friendly option for the total body red light application. Here's an example of where you don't necessarily need a medical grade or a more expensive device. The Platinum LED, as we talked about, has a a range of wavelengths, and the irradiance is about 153 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And the cost for one panel is $1,300. Now, I said it could be up to several thousand. That's if you have 4 of these panels. But nevertheless, the competitor, if you will, or one competitor, is a bed called the NovoThor. And this bed costs over $100,000, even though it has a lower irradiance. So it's not as powerful. It's going to therefore require a longer treatment time. It has a shorter series of wavelengths for in my opinion, a ridiculous cost. So just want to underscore that more expensive or medical grade does not mean better. This is just one case in point. Now, what if you're not concerned about sort of this, total body application and you're trying to zero in on just your facial skin for reduction of fine lines and such? Again, there's a number of products on the market. I like the Bond Charge red light facial mask. Let me give one more sort of comparison here while we're kind of on the topic of comparing cost for what you get. So the Bond Charge mask has these 2 wavelengths. Note that these are the shorter wavelengths. We're not up in the thousands because this is going to go right on the skin, and therefore we don't need that longer wavelength and the deeper penetration because we're trying to have a superficial effect. So you can compare this to the Derma Luxe Flex, which also has similar wavelengths, but is not quite as powerful, yet it is nearly 10 times the cost. So just want to again point out that the Bond Charge not only has specs that have been used in research studies and demonstrated benefit. In fact, here is one photo, and I want to just make sure to mention that this is not from the manufacturer's website. This is from a peer-reviewed medical journal, and you do see a visually obvious reduction in wrinkles, whether it's on the neck or the forehead, when using a device that has the specs from the Bond Charge mask. Another example of where, let's say you're someone who really wants to improve the look of their skin, it would not mean that a more expensive device is better. In fact, there's one little point here we could maybe pick out, which is, why does this Dermalux have a lower wavelength, a more superficial wavelength of 415 when the Bond Charge doesn't? Well, the majority of the research has been used in the 600 to 800 range. So without getting too into the details, I would say save your money. The Bond Charge is a solid device, again, thinking about the dose, the quality, meaning the transparency, and the wavelengths. This is very much in alignment with what has been shown to be beneficial for reduction of facial wrinkles. Again, with this device, remember that biphasic dose response, where 3 times per week for 5 to 10 minutes per session. Something else that I will caution is that many of the device manufacturers don't seem to be adhering to what has been used in the research papers, and therefore they aren't necessarily adhering to the biphasic dose response caution or guidelines, if you will, and may recommend using a device every day, which I believe some of the facial masks and even some of the panels recommend daily use. And that does run a risk, again, of over treatment. I'll give the manufacturers a benefit of the doubt. This isn't always super obvious. We had to really dig into the research to find the data showing this biphasic dose response, partially motivated by my own experimentation of, hey, why did I start to have, a worsening of my symptoms? We had to dig in and find some of those details. So I want to make sure to share that with you so that you don't make the same mistake that I did. Okay, let's talk about spot treatment devices. Let's say, usually this would be for the application of joint pain, muscle pain, joint or muscle recovery, sort of, all kind of wrapped into the same ball, I suppose. This is where there are a number of devices on the market, but I like the Nova Light Pad. What's nice about this is the pad allows you to get 360 around a joint. That is the way most of the research studies that have demonstrated benefit for things like joint pain and recovery, which, by the way, some of the research on joint pain and recovery has demonstrated that red light can be as, if not more effective in reducing pain as something like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, obviously, but without the side effects of the drugs, which can be very irritating to the lining of the gut. This is what's nice about the Nova Light pad. There's another product I've trialed called the Kineon Move, which I think is a good product, but it has 3 lasers, and you sort of strap it on your shoulder or wherever you're trying to treat. But what I found challenging was I didn't feel like I was able to get the coverage of the entire area that was painful or dysfunctional, which is why, again, we favor the Nova Light pad, which is also reasonable, costing just under $300. And the specs, again, regarding the wavelength, the dose, and the specs being transparent are all what's factored into this device, and the recommendations to use this one 3 to 5 times per week at 10 minutes per session. Again, just bear that in mind, because sometimes, especially let's say if you have a sore knee, if you put the pad around your knee, the heat from the device can feel kind of nice and therapeutic. You may be tempted to leave it on for 15, 20, 30 minutes. Do not do that, because you run the risk, again, of actually exacerbating inflammation via heightened reactive oxygen species production while tanking the mitochondrial membrane potential and therefore reducing ATP production. Okay, let's talk about hair growth. There are 2 products here I would recommend, either the TheraDome Pro or the HairMax LaserBand. And I actually use the HairMax personally. So I guess let me deviate for one moment just to show you, again, a few of the journal paper before and afters. And you do see a visible improvement in hair thickness. Now, is it astonishingly remarkable? No. Is it visually apparent? Yes. My view, and this is shared, I think, by many people who have kind of studied hair loss, if you will, no single intervention is going to lead to a massive impact. So that's why it's important to use things like laser in combination with topical treatments, in combination, if you're a man, oral DHT inhibitors, and potentially even leveraging this further if you're motivated with something like derma rolling of the scalp. But, nevertheless, there are visually apparent effects. I just want to, again, remind you that it's not going to be massive. And what I'd hate for someone to do is expect this massive change and potentially lose out on a subtle benefit that, will help with some regrowth and also reduce the loss over time. For the application of hair loss specifically, the 680 nanometers seems to be some of the best, and a certain target application of about 6 to 7 joules per centimeter squared seems to be what's the most effective. Now, regarding devices, there's a few caveats here, and I'm going to sort of integrate some of my personal views into this. So a device like the HairMax LaserBand, certainly I would say worth trying, because there are clinical trials on this device. What's annoying about this device? Let me start with what's beneficial. What's beneficial is you can hit anywhere in the scalp, and especially if you have thinning on the sides, some of the hat type devices don't do a good job of getting coverage on the sides. So this is where a comb can be beneficial. What's annoying about this is, as you can see, you only have one very narrow band of lasers, and after about 30 seconds, the device beeps and you have to move it by 1/4 of an inch, and then 1/4 of an inch, and 1/4 of an inch. And you do this, which is fairly tedious, until you've done the entire scalp, which takes anywhere from 8 to about 12 minutes. Am I happy it's an option? Yes. Is it good to have it? Yes. The same technology is put into this laser band. And what's nice about the laser band is you can sort of offset it to one side of the head, treat kind of one half, It's 30 seconds, and same thing on the other side. So 2 minutes for a total treatment time as compared to 12 minutes and just way less tedious having to sort of move by a quarter of an inch every 30 seconds. Or you have, if side thinning is not that much of an issue, then you can wear the cap as the Thyroid Pro. And this is actually an area where I think the recommendations do tend to track with what's been used in the research. So usually it's one treatment 3 times per week. Okay, so for the Thyroid, that's the sort of cap, 20 minutes per treatment twice per week. And for the HairMax devices, for the band, it's 3 times per week, and you're going to do 30 seconds per area to treat, and you'll modulate the areas depending on what you're trying to cover. And with the comb, you're going to do that 3 times per week. And like I said, it takes about anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes. Okay, there's another use case for red light that doesn't seem to have gotten much recognition online, which I very much so think you should consider. If cognitive health is important to you, as certainly it's important to me, then transcranial red light, meaning red light that can penetrate through the skull bone, is definitely something to consider. Now, what's exciting about transcranial red light is they have shown in research studies the ability to, firstly, penetrate through the cranium, secondly, to increase mitochondrial function in the brain, and to also improve perfusion or blood flow to brain, and also some emerging research showing reduction in inflammatory markers. There's a few caveats here, though. Something like a hair loss device will not penetrate through the skull. And there are really 2 options you have on the market. You have the V-Light NeuroGamma, and the entry level is a NeuroGamma 4, which has been demonstrated to penetrate through the skull bone into the brain. And they have a number of research studies published, many in affiliation with universities. They actually recently published they released what I found to be an interesting post where this is a skull bone and this is the V-Light, and you can see that the light is getting through the skull bone. Now, I mentioned a second ago, there are 2 devices on the market. This is the other device on the market, which is known as the Neuradiant helmet. They compared it to that device, and you see, pretty much no penetration of the cranium. Now, the other thing that I found a little bit disconcerting about the Neuronic helmet was there was a much lower degree of transparency regarding their specs. Additionally, what you see is many companies in the US, and I'm assuming in other countries also, that are white labeling or private labeling different versions of the Neuradiant technology, and calling it all different types of devices along with individual marketing claims. But for the most part, at the root, you have one of 2 options. And the V-Light does seem to have, by far and away, the most compelling scientific evidence supporting its use. Now, perhaps the other company, the Neuronic, will put forth some more compelling data, but as it currently stands, if you're going to be using red light for your brain, which I think is a very, very good investment for obvious reasons, then I would strongly encourage you to use the V-Light because it has demonstrated the ability to get through the cranium, and part of that might be due to pulsing at anywhere between 10 and 40 hertz, which allows the ability to get through the skull bone, to penetrate into the brain, and have this mitochondrial energizing potential that we want to have so that we can have better working memory and executive function, as 2 other findings that have been published using the V-Light device. I will also say, having had obviously used the V-Light myself, there is a clear effect. I noticed it's a 20-minute treatment session, at about the 15-minute mark, I do notice a slight warmth and also a heightened level of mental energy. The treatment with this device is 3 to 6 days per week for 10 to 20 minutes per session. Now, V-Lite does have a few different models. The NeuroGamma 4 is sufficient for most people. What I have here is the Neuro Pro, which is more expensive, but I was so happy with the NeuroGamma 4 that I upgraded to the more robust model that has more lights, again, because I was just so convinced after my personal experience in my own experimentation. So that runs us through the red light devices. This is not covering every single device on the market, but I hope we've covered the main use cases if you're trying to get sort of total body, most bang for your buck. If you're looking to do facial treatments only, if you're looking to do spot treatments, if you're looking to do enhancements of cognition, we've covered the different devices, how to get the target therapeutic output, which is so important because of that biphasic dose response. Be careful not to waste your money because there are plenty of opportunities to do so online, and also be cognizant not to overtreat. Okay, well, I hope this helps. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and I will talk to you next time.